Any type of creator or artist is really missing out if they only learn from other creators or artists of their type. So as songwriters, if we only learn from other songwriters, we are actually missing out. Something to maybe compare it to is the idea of how, for example, baseball became famous for the concept of Moneyball, but then eventually that sort of analytical way of thinking spread into the NFL and is also spreading into the other sports leagues as well, because football and the NFL had something to learn from a totally different sport and how a totally different sport did things. In the same way, we as songwriters can learn from other types of artists. So in this video, we're going to talk about what songwriters can learn from poets. The first thing that we can and should learn from poets is to read our lyrics out loud. Not necessarily sing them out loud, although we should do that as well, but certainly to read them out loud, even without the melody. In poetry, it's very important, the concept of poetry slams or just poetry readings, where people will actually read poetry out loud, or a poet will have somebody else read their poetry out loud to make sure that their poetry flows even when somebody other than themselves is reading it, because you want the poetry to flow naturally even if somebody is unfamiliar with the work. In the same way, with our lyrics, we want them to flow. We want them to have a good feel, a very poetic feel, even without the help of a melody and with the rest of the music. So just like poets, we should learn to read our lyrics out loud. Because sure, our lyrics can be fine even if we don't read them out loud, and even if the only context we ever listen to them in is in the context of having the melody to back them up and the music. But just like how music and instrumentals and the melody can be a crutch for our lyrics, where we can hide subpar lyrics behind a catchy melody, in the same way, we can actually hide how much our lyrics don't really flow and aren't really very poetic with our music. But the best scenario is to actually have it so that all elements are so strong and so good that they hold up on their own. And a great way to do that is simply to read our lyrics out loud like they're poetry, because lyrics are a form of poetry, or we at least should see them as poetry. Now, of course, technically they literally are poetry, but I think there's a distinction here between seeing lyrics as simply lyrics or seeing them as poetry. There's something about seeing lyrics as poetry and considering our lyrics poetry that adds this extra gravitas to it and really ups the standard of how good our lyrics should be. And that actually leads us into the second thing that we as songwriters can learn from poets, and that is the concept of word painting. So poets often fancy themselves almost as painters. Just instead of using colors to paint, they are using words to paint. And they do that by using extra evocative words that are very clear and very sense-driven, so that it almost is like they are not only painting a picture for you, but they are actually bringing in all the senses. They're talking about the feeling, the touch, the hearing, what you're hearing, the sound of the waves. They're bringing all of those things in, and they're really making sure that they are using powerful imagery so that even though it's just words, they can almost teleport you somewhere else and put you in a certain scenario and give you a very clear emotional response. So what should we do with this? Well, we should make sure that we are also making sure that our lyrics are up to that standard and we are showing rather than telling. And this is one of those old and maybe overused, but super helpful adages in all of writing, which is to show, don't tell, right? Nobody likes exposition. Nobody likes it when a character treats us like we're dumb and they explain, hey, I'm feeling sad. Instead, they should just act it out. They should make that little face that just sort of gives you this idea of exactly what they're feeling. They're showing you what they're feeling rather than saying it. This is something that poets definitely have to do. And a part of the reason they have to do this is they don't have the crutch that lyricists have. So we have the crutch of melodies. We have the crutch of music and instrumentation and the entire arrangement. But a poet doesn't have that. A poet just has words. So their words have to be good on their own. They have to be evocative on their own. They don't have anything else to use as a crutch. But we as lyricists should treat our lyrics like they won't have crutches of how good our melody is and our arrangement and how catchy our piano part is. We should instead treat our lyrics like they are poetry, like they are all by themselves and that they need to stand on their own and that they would pass what I like to call the frame test, which the basic idea is just if you take your lyrics, print it out, put it in a frame and put it on a wall, do they hold up? Will people walking by read it like it's poetry, because that's what it is, and say, wow, that's actually really deep. That's cool. What is that? Or will it be like WAP and people say, wow, is this a joke? Because that's terrible in every possible way. It's embarrassing. So overall, just write your lyrics like you don't have the crutch of instrumentation and melody. And another thing that we can learn from poets is an emphasis on lyrical efficiency and in lyrical precision. So when you're writing a novel, you have tons and tons and tons of words. In fact, you might have 300, 500, 700 pages in your novel. You can even afford having a whole exposition that lasts like 100 pages. Now, nobody actually likes that. Everybody complains about that, and you shouldn't do that. But in a book, if you have one off chapter, that's not going to be that huge of a deal. But in a song, we only have like 200-300 words tops maybe to work with. In fact, some of the most lyric-heavy songs that aren't raps tend to be higher in word count, but are usually no more than like 400 words. So we only have so many words in our song, so we need to be able to pack as much of a punch with each word as we possibly can. And that's what I mean by lyrical efficiency. We only have so many words, we only have so many syllables that our melody can accommodate, so we need to make sure that with each of those syllables, we're packing as much of a punch as we possibly can. Now, an important element to lyrical efficiency is the idea of lyrical precision, because what is very important is not necessarily communicating in the least amount of words as we can, so much as packing the most punch with the limited amount of words that we have. So there's sort of a nuanced difference between the two, but just to flesh it out a little bit, when we're talking about specifically lyrical precision in the precision of a word, we're talking about, say, the difference between love and adore. So the word adore is much more specific than the word love, because I love my wife, I love chocolate ice cream, I love pizza, I love lo mein, I love my precious Denver Broncos who got Russell Wilson. Oh, let's go. I love Star Wars, or at least most of it. But when it comes to the word adore, really I just adore my wife. Probably end of list. I certainly don't adore the Broncos. That sounds a little weird and creepy. And I don't adore Star Wars or chocolate ice cream. That would be extra weird. So adore is a more precise word. When I say the word adore, you can really narrow down exactly what I'm talking about, much more so than when I use the word love. So just to give another example of sort of what I'm talking about when I talk about lyrical efficiency, and that it's not just about trying to pack as much as you can into the smallest amount of syllables just by strict information, but it's about just how much of an emotional punch it packs. Let's take the phrase many years and compare that to thousands of sunsets. Now, really, when I say thousands of sunsets, it's implying many years, right? Because if we just do basic math, if we have sunsets and a year is 365 or 66 days, depending on whether it's a leap year or not. So when I say thousands of sunsets, that implies 2,000 or more sunsets. So that implies 6+ years. So many years and thousands of sunsets really is saying the same thing, but which one packs more of an emotional punch? If I say, hey, I've been doing this for many years, or if I say I've been doing this for thousands of sunsets, right? Thousands of sunsets, even though it's more syllables and communicates technically the same thing, it packs so much more of an emotional punch and gives us much more emotional information, even if it doesn't give us more logical information. So that would qualify, to me anyway, as being more lyrically efficient. I gave you so much more information and I gave you some imagery at the same time, when really I'm just saying many years, but I gave you this imagery of thousands of sunsets and the sun coming up and down thousands of times to really show that passage of time. Whereas when I say many years, you probably don't really picture anything. It's just like a phrase, like, yeah, I've been doing it for years, whatever. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about lyrical efficiency. A poet has to care about this, and we as lyricists should certainly care about it too. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, something else you'll definitely find helpful is my free guide. It's my 6-step lyric writing checklist. It walks you through the 6 steps that I go through to write lyrics, because honestly, lyric writing tends to be the most painful part of the songwriting process for probably the vast majority of songwriters. I think a lot of people almost give up on that element or don't even try because they think it's too hard. A lot of people also just don't have fun with it because, again, it seems too hard. But usually I think it's because we set ourselves up to fail. If we just look at a blank page and say, improvise poetry, Joseph, then of course we're going to fail, right? That's asking too much of ourselves. Most humans can't improvise poetry. That's very, very rare. And we shouldn't ask ourselves to do that. In fact, whenever you watch a good movie that has a great script or you read a book that's really well written, that's not their first draft, right? It's not like they just wrote that on their computer on the first try and then the book went out like that. Like, no, it went through many, many revisions. And also they went through steps. They did things like outlining. They did some prep work. They did some character deep dives before they actually wrote the character in the book. They did a whole bunch of background work like that. So we should do similar things, just that apply to lyrics instead of to a book, since obviously the requirements are going to be a little different for lyrics than a book, but it really is off of the same idea. If we can break down lyric writing into smaller, much more doable, easy steps, it raises the probability that we will be able to deliver an amazing lyric that really passes the frame test with flying colors. So if we can set ourselves up not to fail, but instead to succeed, I think that's something important for all of us to do. Again, this is what I use when I am writing my lyrics. I go through these same 6 steps. I think they're super helpful, and I'm sure you'll find them helpful as well. Be sure to check it out. Link in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.